Okay, good morning. We'll officially get started. I hope all of you had a wonderful Thanksgiving break and that you were able to enjoy some time off and, have some downtime. I know we've been talking about that in recent weeks about the importance of downtime. So I hope that all of you were able to enjoy that. I was, though I feel like I was still super busy, but I wasn't busy with work stuff. So I think that's a difference. So today we're going to talk about social media. And Yvonne and I were talking last night about, were we ready for this morning? And we're kind of joking that this is the topic that we actually talk about every single year in these coffees, now Zooms. And so this isn't a new topic for us to talk about, though. I think this year it does have a different spin to it. Being in that we're in a pandemic, and especially our teenagers, they're not going to school every day. They're not seeing their peers and their friends on a daily basis the way they were obviously before. And so I think social media, in a lot of ways, it's how they probably are engaging and getting that social time. And so it has just a different lens now because of the pandemic. I'm going to stop sharing my screen. And then Yvonne, I don't know if you want to jump in and.
Totally. So this one's interesting because I think every year it kind of shifts. And this is one of those topics where I don't really have any concrete answers. And so what I like to do is just I have a lot of conflicting information, essentially. There's good, there's bad. And I think at the end of the day, it's about balance and, how they're using it. And it's just one of those topics that it's not black and white. There's so much in the middle. And especially now, I think I'm practicing different approaches with my family. And I watch that sometimes they work and sometimes they don't. I decided this year with my 17-year-old that I'm going to give him a lot more freedom. But the consequence of that lately has been that, I got up to get a glass of water the other night on a school night at 4 a.m. and I can hear him laughing, playing video games with his friends. And then he was late to class. And so then it's that point of okay, do I need to step back in? Do I just let him completely fail? Where is my role when he's 2 months away from being 18 years old? He's going to go away to college next year and I'm not going to be able to do that, but is now the time where I'm still supposed to step in. So it's been this kind of back and forth. I have not been consistent with it one way or another because sometimes it works and sometimes it doesn't. And so just take in all the information. We'll, discuss the pros and cons of both and trying to find balance for our kids. I'm going to start. I was kind of looking through old notes and I found something that I had written a few years back. And what I had done for about a month was I collected information from students that I was seeing. And the question I had posed to them was, what my parents don't know about my social media use. And so it's not really intended to scare anyone because there's good and bad. And so this is just another way to demonstrate that everybody's different. All our kids are different. Some of them we could probably trust more than other ones. And so I don't want you to be super alarmed about it, but know that you hopefully know which one of these your kid is, but the reality is we don't know everything about our children. As much as we want to, it doesn't work that way. So I'm going to read some of the things that I have, and I added a couple from some things I have heard recently. It says, what my parents don't know about my social media use. I can monitor myself and I'm aware of my own safety. Another one says, my closest friends that I've never met in person. I've met them all online. Another one says, I just talked to my friend. I receive naked pictures weekly that I just delete. I have 37,000 Instagram followers and most of them are adult males. I anonymously share my deepest, darkest secrets. Another one says, I have an extra phone that my parents don't know about. I pretend I'm asleep and then I stay up online. And the last one is, I limit myself to no more than 2 hours per day. So as you see, there's conflicting things, right? Some of these kids maybe monitor themselves more, some don't. I think I shared last week that I'm doing like a texting service with students where I text them to help them with their goals. And a majority of them, their goal is to limit their screen time. And it's interesting because for me, it's really helped me kind of stay accountable, because I'm like, okay, these teenagers have the wherewithal to know that they need to be monitoring their own screen time. So that's something that I should probably be doing for myself as well. And so again, there's such a spectrum of how our kids are using it, you know? And so I always think that's interesting, of like, from their mouths, like, this is what I want my parents to know, or what I don't want my parents to know. So again, I'm going to have like a lot of conflicting information. And I'm kind of going to go back and forth, because the pandemic has definitely changed things, right? It's changed how much time we spend, how we get our social time, filling kind of board time, things like that. And so I'm going to start with, so I'm going to start with 2 case studies, and they're both a little bit extreme, and I hear both of these a lot. So number 1, Jen is a 15-year-old ninth grader whose parents complain of recent moodiness. With a computer in her room, she stays there most of the day, only coming out to have dinner with the rest of her family. She spends a lot of time scrolling on social media. She's been staying, this is obviously not happening now, she's been staying after school to hang out with a new group of friends. And the other day she came home smelling of marijuana. When asked if she'd been smoking, she said one of her friends did, but she would never do that. She's always been a good student, and maintaining her grades in school has always been important. That's just one. The second one says, Josephine is a 17-year-old junior in a competitive Silicon Valley high school who would be the first to attend college in her family. She's a straight A student, but has needed to stay up until 2 a.m. to complete her homework. Her GPA is currently a 4.4, and she's hoping to get into an Ivy League college, but is so stressed and finds it difficult to sleep. When asked why, she said her head is just flooded with images of things that she needs to do. Previously very active, now she's mostly sedentary and spends what little free time she has watching TV. And I read those because that's kind of the spectrum of Piedmont for me. Like, and one of the things I always have to bear in mind is that I don't always get the students who are totally thriving in school and totally thriving in life, right? I'm getting referrals for students who are struggling. But the spectrum of the struggles is so broad. I have people who are just completely disengaged with school. And then I have the students who are so engrossed in education that the rest of their needs are not being met, whether it be sleep or social time and things like that. And so that was just kind of a share, because that's kind of the 2 opposite spectrums. More so now during COVID, I'm getting kids who are just really feeling trapped and isolated and unmotivated. And so when I think of social media, like I really push for people to be making connections with their peers. And that's really difficult to do. I don't know if anybody's ever taken an online class. I did my entire undergrad degree online, and I didn't make any friends because it's difficult. It's just not how we work. And I know our kids are a little bit better at doing that. And I know our teachers really try to get them to connect. But what I'm seeing is just real loneliness in a lot of students who are just trying to fill the time. And so I really want to emphasize that I think it's important that we know how our kids are using their screens and not just how long they're using them. Because, for instance, if my kid is on texting his grandma for an hour, I'm not going to count that as something negative. Whereas if they're just scrolling through mindless pictures of celebrity makeup or whatever, that might be something that's more negative that I think can impact their self-esteem, right? So that was just kind of a tangent before the presentation. Does anybody have any thoughts or questions so far? And I think these are also for us. You know, I know that I read something that said, when you pick up your phone, you have to ask yourself a couple of questions. Like, am I bored? Am I anxious? Am I feeling worried? Am I feeling fearful? Like, what am I feeling right now? And am I using this to try to distract myself from what I'm feeling? And I know for me, I've been spending a lot of time just scrolling through mindless stuff that I'm probably never going to purchase. And I think for me, I tend to pick it up more when I'm feeling anxious and uncertain about life. Even this morning when I heard something that somebody said that Gavin Newsom was thinking about doing another shutdown. It was really weird that I picked up my phone and just started going through Instagram. Like it was like almost like an anxiety response for me to just like pacify myself in a meaningless way. And I think that is kind of what's happening. I don't know if you've had that experience, Jenny, where like, because I know you said that Twitter for you is something that creates anxiety.
For sure. And especially, it's actually better now, but like right before the election, right after that week of the election, I would just like, I I listened to this podcast and they call it doom scrolling on Twitter, where it's just like all of like the negative and like people freaking out. And that was really bad for me. I had to like no, I'm not gonna.
I've never heard that term. That's awesome.
So yeah. And so I guess, one thing I've noticed with my own phone use, and like when I say using my phone, because I don't tend to text a lot of people. I mean, I do some, but I'm not like, when I'm on my phone, I'm usually on social media and like scrolling through Instagram or Twitter or something like that. And a couple of things I've noticed with my own personal use, and I don't do this anymore, but there was a period last year where I was trying to make the whole family do it. And then they were yelling at me. And so I gave up, or I was like, everybody has to plug their phone in the dining room at night. And then we're not going to have our phones at night. And
I think we started that last year when we did this.
We did. It was from one of these coffees and one of these talks. And what I noticed about myself is that I was going to bed a lot earlier because I wasn't staying up looking at my phone. And like, I would be like laying in bed reading a book and be like, oh, I'm tired. I'm gonna go to sleep now. I also have noticed with myself, and I've talked about this before, I am a voracious reader. I read a lot. I don't read anything of like substance, but I'll be in a novel and it'll be like a high tension part of the novel, and I'll put it down and I'll grab my phone because I'll be like, oh, that's too stressful right now. Like the characters in the book are giving me anxiety because they're being stupid. So right. I'll distract myself with my phone. So yeah, it is a total distraction tool.
Yeah. So I was, when you were talking, I was thinking about our kids and how, okay, you're in class, you're on your computer, you're feeling stressed about the content of what's going on in the class, and you have all these free windows that you can open up and look at other things that you want to. Like, that is probably something that is really happening because they're probably using it to pacify their stress too, And I remember when I was doing online school, I mean, you can walk away, I could go make lunch, I'm missing things. It's just not the same. And, even though we're all doing the best we can to make it work, it just doesn't typically engage us in the same way. I've heard kids lately use the word, it feels optional, it feels not real, it feels like it doesn't count the same. And it's like, intuitively, we know that that's not true, but I think the feeling of it being so far away and disconnected for them is making them feel like it might be less important than if it was in real life. And it's like, they know that's not true. They know this still counts toward college, but there's just something about this like facade, like this whole screen that I think is just making people feel that sense of being disconnected. And I think that social media is very grounding. It makes you feel connected. It gets lonely, like I have 5 people in my house, but some days there's days where I'm like, gosh, I wish I could just be around the people that I, have fun with and that I take a break with or whatever. And so I kind of try to monitor like how they're using it. And for me, it's a little bit different. My kids aren't really into social media. I know my older one uses Instagram, but they're more gamers. They like to talk, and I know Nathan is a gamer too, right? Like, doesn't he talk to his friends? And so I allowed that to happen. I think I'm more comfortable with it because I can hear what's going on. You know, they have their door open, they have to have their doors open in their room, and I can hear them talking. And, you know, a lot of it's like violent games and things like that. But I know most of the time who they're talking to, how long they're talking. I think for a lot of parents, it's more, you're more afraid when you don't know exactly what they're doing, right? Like, I think it just
Yeah. And I think this is one of those areas where if you have girls versus having boys, it's a little bit different, because I think, like you were saying, boys' social media use tends to be more of the gaming.
Mm-hmm.
And there's certainly dangers with that. Whereas girls, you know, it's a lot more Instagram or TikTok. You know, my daughter will, she loves TikTok videos about like dogs. Like there's this one person that she follows with like pit bulls, and it's super cute. But like she will send and text me these TikToks that are super cute at like 5 a.m. And I'm like, what are you doing? Why are you on TikTok looking at these videos? I mean, I love that you share them with me because they are super cute, but
it's good to know what you're doing online. So that's good. Yeah, I think, I don't know, all the parents here, like who has boys, who has girls, who has both, but I do think it's different. And maybe that's where my level of, maybe not, I tend to be kind of a fearful mother. I'm a kind of a worry wart, but when it comes to social media, I haven't really felt that strongly about it. One, because my kids aren't really that into it, and two, because they are boys. So I know that is different. When I talk to clients who are female and they tell me, you know, like the girl with the 37,000 Instagram followers, that's not terribly uncommon. And it freaks me out, right? Especially when they engage or they want to meet people and things like that. And I think right now we're kind of getting some respite from that because people aren't really leaving their houses. But generally speaking, when I hear the girls talking about it, I get really worried. I had a student last year who was sharing that there was a kind of like an older man who was like preying on kids. I don't know if I told you this, the gift card scam. And, you know, they had to give money to this guy and he would basically turn their money into more. And the first time they do it, it works. So they give him $20 and he gives them $50. So then he ups the ante and, you know, they give him $100 that he's going to turn into 500 and then they never hear from him again, things like that. And so I always worry, you know, for our teenagers. And so again, like having boys, it just doesn't feel the same. I'm not so worried about them, you know, having really low self-esteem because they're comparing themselves to people online. But I know for girls, it's real. I know that people, you know, I have like students who are just, you know, truly beautiful teenagers and just feeling so inadequate because they're comparing themselves to people on social media. And I know that sometimes people spend hours and hours, you know, even me, I look up YouTube makeup videos and I'm like, you know, the girl who's putting their makeup on is 22, right? And I'm like, ooh, I have big pores and cracks in my head, you know, all those things. And so for me, who is more like self-assured than I was as a teenager, I try to imagine it from the perspective of being a 15-year-old girl who's already suffering from low self-esteem and knowing that, you know, it's rough, you know, it's difficult.
Yeah, I was thinking about that, and like my daughter who will like have somebody take like 35 pictures of her to like post the perfect one on Instagram.
Mm-hmm.
And like, you know, I'm like, oh God, why do you do that? But then again, I was thinking, because, you know, something that Gina had put in the chat about, and you hate that you put something out there that you don't want to be out there. My husband has a tendency to post the ugliest pictures of me, like the ones that you're like, I don't. And so I'm like, so I get like where she wants like the best picture, because I feel like I'm the same way. My husband will tag me in a picture and I'm like, take that off the internet. What are you doing?
Posts are endearing. But it's true because you put it out there, you're like, oh my gosh, you know, the ones I pick of myself are always look a little skinnier than they really are in real life. So the ones when you get tagged in a photo, you're like, uh-oh, you know, I didn't have that sort of control over it. So I have this kind of little presentation and it comes from Common Sense Media, which I'm sure a lot of people have heard of. It's a website that like rates movies and talks about, you know, technology and things like that with our kids. And this one is social media, gaming, and mental health. And I always like to go back to the mental health perspective because, you know, I think it's such an impactful way to, you know, change your mood. You know, you'll see kids go online and then leave kind of in a more sour mood, or you'll see them online and they're engaging with their friends and it lifts their spirit. So again, it's that conflicting, like, is this bad for them or is it good for them? So I'm going to talk about a little bit about their brain development, the pitfalls of social media, looking for warning signs, and then the potential positives. And then I have a little bit of stuff related specifically to COVID, because it's kind of a game changer, and it's so interesting to be in this time where there's no data about how kids fare during a pandemic, or, you know, pandemics and social media. Like, we're like the trailblazers right now, and we're learning a lot, and we don't know a lot. We don't know long-term how this is going to impact us and our kids. And so really just trying to monitor and do the best that we can and make the right choices for our kids. It's not foolproof, but I think if we continue to just talk about it and talk about the pros and cons, I think it gives us a good guide to know which direction is the healthiest for our own family. So what we know for sure is that how much time we spend online does matter. Teens who use social media more often tend to be disconnected from, you know, real life relationships, you know, more self-esteem issues, things like that. It matters what they're using it for. Teens who use it passively only to get likes and follows tend to be more disappointed when the likes and follows aren't the same numbers as their peers. You know, and then there's other factors like, how does this impact their sleep? How does this impact their friendships? How does this impact their mental health, their general health? Those are the things that we're always, you know, being a little bit worried about, because it does. You know, I tell students all the time, there is nothing more important than sleep, be it medication, therapy, you know, anything you can tell me. There's nothing that I think is more important than rest. A rested brain is a healthier brain. And that's something that, you know, I hear students getting 4 or 5 hours of sleep, sometimes less, getting up for school and then sleeping the rest of the day away. So the bottom line is that a teen's brain is evolving. So they're more likely to engage in risky behavior, poor decision-making. They're hyper aware of their peers' approval. And I think that in itself is dangerous because, you know, we have all these kids whose brains are not fully developed, making judgments about one another and impacting the way that that other person behaves or feels. So I think the biggest one is that those feelings of like comparing, you know, comparing grades, comparing, you know, lifestyles, comparing finances, comparing looks, all those things, it makes you feel inferior and inadequate in a lot of ways. It is very rare that I have a student who feels really good about who they are. Self-esteem is one of the main topics that I work with, be it a student with anxiety or depression. I think self-image, how they feel that their family feels about them, how they feel that their peers think about them, is so dramatic and impactful at this age, that, you know, working on their value and their worth and how it comes from more than just their grades, that's something that is really, really hard to teach a teenager because that's not how they see the world at that point. So we'll talk about like how to help. Like, how do you help when they're having these comparisons, you know, with people who are unattainable, you know, with celebrities, and, you know, how do you help them? And validating feelings, you know, it is really hard to measure up, especially to people who have makeup artists and people who have a ton of money. It's hard to measure up to them. That must be really difficult for you. I think it's also important to, a lot of times as parents, we always say like, oh, I got through it, you'll be fine. And not really acknowledging the differences between now and back when we were younger. And I'm probably older than a lot of people. And so I can't even imagine. It was already difficult to be a teenager without constantly comparing myself to people that I didn't even know, you know, and so they have these extra pressures. And I think it's important to validate the differences. Yes, I got through high school, but I didn't have the same challenge that you did. You know, I was never bullied online, because if anybody wanted to communicate with me, they had to call my house and get through my mom first, which would never have happened, right? And that's not something that kids have, you know, that sort of protective bubble from.
You know, and I'm gonna as the parent of a daughter,
Mm-hmm.
I think this is really important. And you know, the idea of beauty and comparing um, yourself to what you see. It used to be like what you're seeing in magazines and in movies and on TV.
Mm-hmm.
And now it's like what you're seeing on, you know, social media and Instagram and YouTube and that sort of thing. So it's kind of, it's the same thing. You know, I know when I was a teenager, like you get the beauty magazines, or I get 17 magazine, right? And like, you know, you compare yourself to the people on the pages. So it's the same thing. Like, I think it's something that as women, we tend to do. And, you know, men likely do it as well. I don't want to like totally discredit and say that men don't go through this. I think it's more prevalent amongst women. So I think, you know, just talking to your daughters about, you know, when they see somebody like, you know, some sort of Instagram influencer or something like that, like, you know, asking them like, well, what do you think is beautiful about them? Like, what do you like most about their look? And then like talking to them about themselves. What do you like most about your face, hair, body, like whatever it is? And like, you know, really encouraging them to like see, you know, we all have parts of ourselves that we aren't crazy about.
Mm-hmm.
And that's okay. You know, I think that I don't think that the idea should be that, you know, you just love yourself no matter what. I myself was watching a makeup artist on, it was on Facebook last night, but they were talking about like, you know, the whole point is like you play up your best features and you lessen the ones that you don't like. I mean, and we've done that in society forever. You know, I mean, fashion and beauty has always been a thing. That is not something that's new. And so I think that it's teaching our kids what is something that you really like best about yourself, and then how do you play up that feature and that sort of thing.
Yeah, one of the exercises I do with kids is I'll talk about, it's very comfortable to talk about your best friend, right? So I'll say like, hey, Ginny, tell me 5 wonderful things about your best friend. And you can rattle them off. Like, she's beautiful. And what are her best features? Oh, gosh, she's got great hair and da da da. And when we turn it around and I ask the question to you, you know, Ginny, what are your best features? What do you really like about the way that you look? A lot of pause, a lot of discomfort in, you know, honoring the good things about yourself, because it might feel vain or, you know, pretentious or, you know, however. And it's a great exercise in self-esteem, because it's okay to feel good about yourself. It's okay to acknowledge that there's imperfections. You know, one of the questions that says here is like, hey, if your kid's online looking at all these things, ask them the question, how many pictures do you think it took to get that one? You know, like 35, right? That's how many it took. And, you know, how do you think there was any special lighting or filters involved? Amy just put, social media is influencing where my kid wants to buy clothes, whether that's like the brand, I don't know, Amy, if it's like the brands or, you know, the popular styles, if they're even more expensive. But, you know, I would assume that maybe she saw somebody who looked really cool and wanted to emulate that in some way. And that's totally normal.
It's funny. And Amy, I don't know like where your kids wanting to buy clothes. I find the same thing with my daughter. It's making her social media influence though is making her want to shop at thrift stores. And I'm like, what? And she's like, Mom, sustainability. Like we shouldn't be like, you know, it's bad for the environment. And I'm like, okay.
That literally comes back every 20 years. It was like a 70s thing and then a 90s thing. We'll save you money, but I don't know how I feel about used clothes during a pandemic. But it's true though, like you see it and it's the cool thing, and for her it's the environment or whatnot. But it definitely has an influence over, you know, I think for us it was like you get 17 magazine once a month, mm-hmm. and then you have all those ideas. But imagine having a new 17 magazine every hour. You would just be like scrolling through and feeling more and more disappointed about the way that we looked than, you know, than we had to then.
Let me, because Amy also put in a comment before, my kids starts to watch a lot more YouTube videos than before. I understand maybe it's a way of getting entertainment relaxation under the pandemic situation. but I'm worried about watching videos at night is affecting her sleep. Should we set a time limit, and how to enforce that? So what I would say about YouTube, and YouTube is interesting because I think with a lot of our kids, YouTube is like television to them. You know, like where we used to like watch TV at night. I don't know how many of them actually watch network TV. Not that many of them. They watch YouTube. Like that's their TV. And so, yeah, you do want to probably set a limit at night. I mean, if they're doing that at 2 a.m, that's not great. Just like your parents would never let you like stay up and stay on the couch and watching TV at 2 a.m. It's the same thing.
Yeah. Back in our day, there was only infomercials on between like 1 and 4.
Right. And so they have like this 24/7 access. What I would say, you know, and I had mentioned it before that I was doing it last year, it does work to have the family like station of like plugging in all the devices outside of the bedrooms and like just having a like cutoff time. What I would say about that is make it a whole family thing where the parents have to do it too. So that way your kid just doesn't feel like you're picking on them and punishing them. It's super hard because, you know.
And it's always hard. Like if these were rules that I established when they were 5, it would make it so much easier. But I've been so inconsistent. And like we said, last year we were having them plug in, and this year I'm trying to give them more freedom. And so I've been all over the place. And I think that for them is what's infuriating. Like, make up your mind, Mom, are we going to do this or not? And be consistent with it. I think kids actually appreciate the structure of that. But I think for me, it was just like trying to give him the benefit of the doubt that he was prepared to make decisions for himself, which clearly we're not quite there yet. And so now as we're talking about it, like, okay, now I have to pull back a little bit and take a little bit more control over the situation because he's not sleeping. You know, Amy, your kiddo is not sleeping. And again, it goes back to like, there's nothing more important than sleep. And if I have to have my kid upset for a couple of days with me because of it, and he's getting rest, like that's a sacrifice I'm going to have to take. I'm not excited about talking about it with him today, but I know as a parent, like his well-being is my priority more than his affection for me right now, you know? And so I think definitely setting limits and, you know, enforcing them, whether, you know, sometimes I've had to do it more extreme. Like I had to pull a plug out in their room because they always have ways to, you know, to get around the rules and the boundaries. But I definitely think as parents, it's like, it is our role to do that. You know, it's not the popular thing to do, obviously, with the kids, but, you know, if you're noticing, you know, I don't know if you're noticing any mood changes or anything because your kid's tired, you know, those are things to definitely look out for.
I mean, you can always like shut off the Wi-Fi router and just be like,
sorry, nobody in the house.
You know, it's Comcast. I don't know what's wrong.
That's a good one. We kind of live up in the hills, you know, it's windy out, it's hard. This talks a little bit about the effects of on-call communication, never-ending notifications. And that's something that I've talked to my younger ones about. Turn off your notifications. You know, they're very distracting. If I'm sitting there hanging out with my family and it pops up that somebody said something about one of my pictures on social media, chances are I'm going to pick up my phone and look at it. And that's something that is totally new, this generation, constantly being notified. You know, I want to look. We go back to the FOMO, you know, what am I missing out on? What's happening when I'm not there? If I don't keep up with it, you know, maybe they're going to replace me in that conversation and I'll be out of the loop, and then I won't really know how to engage with my friends because I didn't see that. Or, you know, I want to check, somebody might have written something good, somebody might have written something bad, whatever it is, I want to know. So it's like constantly being updated, constantly having to be in the know. That's exhausting. You know, that's something that is new, really, but it's, you know, I think it could be very dangerous. Is it Cara? I'm curious how many parents utilize Wi-Fi network management or parent controls. I currently don't. I just had a conversation with my cousin who is going to try out Bark. I don't know if you guys heard of that. It will basically notify you if there's any alarming exchanges, texts, even things like if your kid were to type something that said, you know, I'm not feeling that great, I'm something about suicide or feeling down, it will notify you. So one of the things that people like about it is that you're not reading necessarily all their personal messages, because, you know, especially when they're teenagers, we got to give them a little bit of space, but it's notifying us of anything that could be harmful or dangerous. I don't know how well it works. I'll update you guys when I hear more, but my cousin was going to try it out. I think they give you like a free week. Again, it's called Bark. Which other one? I used Our Pact for a while. And that one was more like, okay, do your chores, and they're not listening to me, and I can just shut off their device from my phone, which was helpful, but it wasn't really monitoring for, unsafe conversations. It was more just having control over how much time was spent and which websites they were able to go to. Like at that point for them, I think I blocked, they were younger, so I blocked like Instagram and all those other kind of where they can talk to strangers, and I let them like be able to surf the web, but they would like block certain ones. So I don't know, Ginny, have you used any of those yet?
We tried the one where it will like shut off the device. I can't remember what it's called, but it would shut off the device in like certain hours.
Mm-hmm.
It was super glitchy though, and like the times didn't always like work out, and it was that honestly it caused more chaos and like
and I think too, like I remember the Our Pact one, my kids figured out a workaround.
Yeah.
And they're always going to, right? Like
we do have, we talk about YouTube. My daughter actually isn't on YouTube that much, but my son is, and he's 11. And so obviously, with him being younger, there's certain things that we definitely don't want him to be exposed to. So we do have parental controls on YouTube set up on his iPad. So we do have that. Yeah.
Does anybody else have any of those or any suggestions or ideas if they've worked, if they haven't worked, any specific ones? Because I think it's something worth trying, if it's difficult. In a perfect world, I want my kids to just listen and do what I say, but it's probably not going to happen. So if anybody has any suggestions on that, I think that'd be awesome.
I think going back to what we were talking about as far as, managing sleep and how important that is. For our family, we utilize Xpinion, and they have a kind of a control for each device, and you could manage as far as when the Wi-Fi turns off, when school time is, or, things like that. So just, general guidelines where you're able to balance between, the screen time you have all day long. And then for my family, we also have a screen off time, and that's between 5:30 and 7:30. It gives them time after school to, relax with your YouTube or whatever, but it's going to be family time where, I don't necessarily make them, help me in the kitchen necessarily sometimes, but just to have that time where you're away from the screen to be able to, reflect or engage with the family.
Yeah.
So yeah. I find that very helpful.
I think that's really so important, especially now more than ever. I mean, it was probably before, but now that they, the whole thing about limiting screen times is like completely out the window because they're on their screens all day. All of us,
right,
that are like working from home and doing so, like we're all on our screens too. And I just know for myself, I need that time away, like to like, I just can't, like look at another screen.
Yeah. And I think that goes into like modeling for our kids and how, Ms. Davis and I said in the beginning, like, what was my screen time? My screen time yesterday was 8 hours and 11 minutes. That's like a lot of my wake time because I did sleep a lot yesterday. And sometimes I think in my house, I am kind of the social media problem per se, because my kids are like, Mom, come on. And so what I did last week is there's a setting on the iPhone that says that my social media will be off from 4 to 7 because that's primarily when I'm getting done with work. I'm going to cook dinner, and and they're done with school, and maybe they're taking a break before their homework or whatever. And that's such a crucial time where we can be doing something where we're engaging. And I felt kind of sad that I had to like actually put a setting on my phone to force me to do that. But I think that just goes to show like how easy it is to get sucked in, there might be a group chat going on and I'm like, ooh, what's going on? I'm going to miss out. And I'm always in the middle of it or whatever. But I think modeling that for our kids and, you know, and also like, I always kind of felt like I don't want to have to entertain my kids, like, you know, but even just being with them, like when I think about like how much it means for them when I'm just present, when I'm watching this show that I don't really want to watch with them and how happy they are about it, it makes me feel really bad that I have 8 hours where I could have been doing something with them where I chose to look on Wayfair for new furniture that I can't afford, you know, like.
Yeah. I think that screen off time for us is super important, even though I still get a lot of complaints. But I think that, you know, I find they'll play games that they haven't played together. You know, I have 3 between 10 and 16, and they used to be close, but, you know, you kind of have to create that now. And I feel like it's helped a little bit.
I think that's fantastic. I know it made me sad when you said that because mine are about between 11 and or 12 and 17, and they used to wrestle and go in the backyard and throw the football and all these things, and now it's like everybody's in their own room, including me. And it's very, I mean, considering that we're home 24 hours a day together, how much time is actually spent engaging with one another, it kind of makes me sad. Like, ooh, I could do better than that, and I have to be the one to set that example, and it's a struggle for me. And so I think I just need to get to the root of like, why am I so distracted by this? Why does it feel so comforting when I'm feeling overwhelmed and anxious? And what can I do differently to show them a healthier way to deal with stress? You know, and in the you know, during that, like having fun and maybe going for a family walk or things that, you know, I don't know how you guys were, but in the beginning of the pandemic, I was like so hyper paranoid about how my kids were doing. And I want to make sure that we have outside time and learning time and cooking time and game time and all these things. And it was very structured, and we started a garden. And then we just kind of settled into this new normal where everyone just kind of went their separate ways and became very isolating. And so, you know, trying to find the balance between maybe not overdoing it and starting a garden and, you know, whatever, but really prioritizing the time. Like in some ways, I know this is a real struggle this year, but in some ways it is a gift to have this time with our families that we would never have had otherwise. You know, there were so many days where I get home from work after 7 and I'm exhausted, I'm burnt. And so now to be here during my like prime hours, like I could do a better job. And I think that's, you know, the part that I'm responsible for and that I want to share with them, you know, that
I think it's important to, you know, and the idea of self-care is a theme that we touch on all the time when we have these talks. But as a parent, like recognizing what you yourself need. I know for myself, I'm an introverted person. And even though I might be technically by myself in a room by myself all day, like we talked about, like I'm on a screen, I'm in meetings, and like I actually need some time away, you know, I'm like, I just need so, and so, but like figuring out like how much time do I need and like how do I do it? So maybe I go on a 20-minute walk by myself, and then that's good. I can come back and I can engage with my family and, you know, like that sort of thing. And like teaching our kids how to recognize themselves, like what they need. I was teasing my husband the other day because he my husband is a high school administrator also. And so he came home and he was at his day at school, and he came home and he was like, it was like nonstop stream of words just coming out of his mouth about nonsense, just blah, 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 blah. And I'm like, hey, were you like in Zooms all day where you just had to listen? Like, you know, were you just in meetings where you were just listening? And he was like, how'd you know? And I'm like, because he's more of an extroverted person and he needs to talk. And it's like he had all these words that he was just like, he needed to. And so recognizing like in our family members what they may need is important too. So I think that's part of the self-care is like not just what you need, but like what your family needs also, and being able to give it to them.
Being able to say it, like even when I'm here, like there's probably been 10 times in the last 10 minutes where I don't know if you can see behind me, but they peek into the French doors to see if there's people on the screen. If there's not, they just come right in and like walk in, and it's like, you know, even between my meetings and between my sessions and things like that, sometimes I just need a minute, you know, and I tend to do the same thing with them too. I'll be like, oh, are you doing your work or whatever? And so being able to verbalize like my needs, I think is important, because then it shows them how to do the same thing. Like, hey, after my work day, I kind of need a half hour of you guys not just talking, you know, like my husband's kind of the same way. He's in meetings all day and then he comes in and he wants to talk about everything. And I'm like, I can't care right now because I'm in the middle of something, but let's talk later, you know, like I just give me a minute. And there's not that natural space where like when I come home from work, I drive slowly and I drive the long way and I process and I, you know, pull myself together or whatever. I don't have that luxury anymore because now they just pour in here and I don't have that space. So really like prioritizing yourself and your well-being and, you know, letting them know that it's okay to need something and teaching them like, hey, what is it that you need from me? You know, maybe it's my kid doesn't like when I peek in his room when he's on Zoom. It's embarrassing, obviously. And being able to verbalize that, you know, so it's, again, there's like no right answer. You know, this is just such a weird time. I read this thing and I wasn't at first going to tell you who wrote it. I won't even tell you who wrote it yet till the end because I thought it was a really good information. It talks about like young people turn to their digital devices just to fill the holes caused by the pandemic and how, you know, this was supposed to be something temporary. We thought it was a 2-week break and now it's just this whole new world of things. And, you know, they embraced it as being a short-term thing and then it turned into months and months. And we've just kind of established this new pattern that might've been okay for 2 weeks, but as we're moving into months and months is less healthy. You know, and it talks about the teens, their new existence is plagued by so much loss of school, loss of friends, loss of freedom, loss of sports, loss of in-person lessons, you know, all these things. And it's really difficult for them to think of, you know, the things that are positive in their life. And, you know, one of the things in my sessions I always do is I ask them like, okay, there's going to be a lot of things that have been tough this week that we talked about, but I always want to open up with something good that happened and something that you've accomplished. And sometimes it's just that you got out of bed. Sometimes it's just that you got in the shower. Sometimes it's that you brushed your hair or gave your mom a hug, or it could be something really small. But I think when they're consumed with so much loss, there's so much like searching for something good. And I think that comes with, you know, being online all the time. You know, the internet for them is essential to staying connected to people, but I think it's that balance between, are we staying connected with people or are we numbing ourselves from reality? Like, where's the middle ground? Where's the balance of that? So I think it could be super productive to be online. It could be super destructive. And it's, again, just like modeling that balance. Like, hey, I'm going to pick up my phone because there's really something I want to look at versus I just need to pass the time and I don't want to think about anything right now. And being honest about that.
Yeah. You know, and we're about out of time. So next week, actually, our topic is going to continue this theme, because next week we're talking about how to raise an independent teen. And so the idea that you're setting some boundaries and setting rules, but you're still giving them independence, and how do you balance the two? Which I don't know if Yvonne and I have figured that out, but
working on it.
But that's what we're going to talk about next week. But I think
when our kids move out.
To sum up social media, I think it's important to, you know, and like I started today, like this is something that we've talked about every year since I've been principal in social media. And social media is something, it's really interesting as a phenomenon in our society. It's really evolved. It's not something, you know, it used to be like, oh, just don't participate in social media and like not have it be part of it, and don't let your kids be on social media. I don't think that's an option anymore. Social media is part of our lives. It's actually, if you look at the statistics, it's the #1 way that people get information and news. It is a huge part of our society. And so I think that the trick with all of this is always, you know, balance and teaching our kids, you know, and I think of the conversation we've been having today about like, when do you limit it? And like, you know, so you're making sure that they get sleep and like that sort of thing. as opposed to like, I'm not ever going to let them on social media. And I'm like kind of pleased that like this is the direction we're going into this conversation, because I don't think it's realistic to completely block it from their lives and not have them be engaged in it.
Yeah, and I think like for one of the things that I really want, like with my younger one, he's like gaming a lot. And I really think it's that balance of like having him create balance. Like, how many hours a day were you moving physically? How many hours a day did you sleep? How many hours were you outside versus how many more video games? And like having him write that out and be like, ooh, that was a lot compared to what I did that was healthy. I tried to do that the other day. Have your kids called you a boomer yet?
Have they called me a boomer? No, I would murder them.
Okay, yeah. So that's like the thing now. So every time I try to like get like motherly about social media, they'll say, okay, boomer, which if you don't know is like their term for an older person that doesn't understand anything. It comes from like baby boomer. And so we started this conversation and they're like, okay, boomer, you're the one that's on social media all the time or whatever. But I don't know why I just told you that. But so it's like they think that I'm not aware, but it's like, no, I have the same struggles as you do with this. But I think, you know, having them establish that balance of like, make a little chart, you know, did you go outside today? Did you get fresh air today? Did you sleep at all? And then if your numbers are way off, like contemplate that, process that, figure out what would be healthiest for you and why. And again, model that, which I'm telling myself more than I'm telling you guys. Maybe.
All right. So next week, like I said, we're going to talk about raising independent teens. So we'll kind of continue on with this theme. I hope you guys can join us next week and have a wonderful rest of your week.
Thank you.
All right. Thanks, everybody.